You know, sometimes you just screw up, and usually you just screw up once. But this time, it was not twice, but 3 times. Here's my confession. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today I'm confessing my sins of synthesis, in which I misjudged 3 synthesizers really badly. So all 3 of these, the Arturia MicroFreak, the Korg Opsix, and the Novation Summit, came to our store, and we were putting it on the schedule to shoot videos. And honestly, I was not excited about any of them. I was like, okay, these will be interesting, they'll be cool, but you know, it is what it is. We'll do it. We'll see how they sound. And I was blown away on each of these. When I plugged it in, I started playing with it. I was just overwhelmed with how powerful each of these were and how accessible. They were so easy to use and so easy to get into and really easy to get lost in. And I want to talk about why I think I overlooked these and why you might have overlooked these, or why I think they might be slightly overlooked in the marketplace, or kind of not necessarily as popular as, say, some of the sequential instruments or the Moog instruments or even the Behringer kind of wave of clones that have been coming out. These are all, people, they're respected, they're liked, there's nothing negative said about these, but they're not necessarily the hottest or the coolest kids on the block, so to speak. So why might that be? I think one of the things that people misjudge is each of these is really utilizing the power of digital oscillators in a way that maximizes their sonic capabilities. So with analog oscillators, you're fairly limited in the amount of sounds you can create. Each of these deliberately chose digital oscillators, not to save money, not because they couldn't afford to do analog oscillators, but because digital oscillators have a lot more sonic capability in terms of sound sculpting than analog oscillators. It's just a fact. And these really push synthesis. These aren't, I think one of the things with when people hear the word digital, there's a misconception that it's going to be more of like a workstation, like a Phantom or a MODX, which are great instruments, but workstations are not necessarily synthesizers. They have elements of a synthesizer. Sometimes they have synth engines in them, but for people that love synthesizers, often they love the idea of painting with sound and kind of focusing on a particular sound and evolving it to something that fits into an ambient piece or a song they're creating. It's about designing sound. And digital oscillators are incredibly powerful, and really that path has not, because of the arc of the way digital electronic instruments were developed, in the 80s there was a obsession with realism, and so that realism kind of led way to sample-based electronic instruments that it was all about how realistic could the sounds get, and so that became kind of the arc. It wasn't so much about how far can we push synthesis, subtractive, FM, whatever. And so that kind of thread has been re-picked up, and I would argue that it was re-picked up by Dave Smith, and there's other people that have contributed, but Dave Smith really in the early 2000s with the Evolver instruments created these kind of brought back the idea of hybrid synthesizers, where there was digital oscillators, analog oscillators, and there was the best of both worlds. And I've read interviews in which he said he did this because there's a lot of things you can do with digital synthesis that you can't with pure analog synthesizers. And there's nothing wrong with pure analog, pure digital, hybrid. They're all different, and they all are, at the end, what is the end product? What is the experience for the musician? And so I think all three of these have digital oscillators at their core. The Opsix, it's not an oscillator, it's a operator because it's an FM synthesizer, but their core kind of building block for sound are digital. And I think sometimes people assume, okay, that's not as good as, say, a Behringer analog clone or a Moog, one of the Moog products, or one of the sequential products. So I just think that people I think that's why they get overlooked, and why sometimes it's just associated like, oh, digital is not as good as analog. But these are all incredibly powerful. So I'm not going to go super deep into the specs of each, but I'm going to highlight why they're interesting, and then we're going to take a listen, and you can hear for yourself. And then if you want to explore more, I would recommend looking up videos on each of these in particular, because there's a lot of great content that do deep dives into both how they work and what the specs are in depth if you're curious. So let's start with the Arturia MicroFreak. So the MicroFreak is really a hybrid synth. It has an analog filter and digital oscillators. And the analog filter is based on the classic Oberheim SEM filter, which is a kind of revered vintage filter. And it really is a powerful freak. It's totally insane. It's got the digital oscillators is got 16 different oscillator kind of algorithms in it. And some of those were developed in collaboration with noise engineering, and others were taken from open source code from Mutable Instruments, both companies that kind of specialize in modular Eurorack type instruments. And Arturia has taken that and put it into the MicroFreak alongside some of their own digital oscillator algorithms. And it really is a pretty broad palette of sounds. It's a paraphonic instrument, which means that it's not true polyphony. So it's a four-voice synth. So you can play 4 votes at the same time, but it all routes through a single through a single filter and VCA. So it's not a true polyphonic analog synth, but it is incredibly powerful for what it is. It also has, which is interesting, it has 2 envelopes, and one is kind of like a second LFO in a way, because you can have it repeat itself. So usually an envelope is not a repeating envelope. In this case, you can make it a repeating envelope and make it more of a kind of modulation source than is normally, or just more like an LFO as opposed to an envelope. That's another really cool feature that makes this a unique instrument. But what I love about it is even just going through the presets, you're instantly kind of inspired. And some of the sounds that you get out of it are so rich. They kind of just linger. It's very organic and a full sound. And it's just very inspiring. It's got an arpeggiator, it's got a sequencer, and it has a basic mod matrix that is actually pretty powerful. So it gives you some, that's one of Arturia's kind of go-tos on a lot of their analog and their other analog synths, and in this case, the hybrid synth. They figured out a way to make modular kind of routing presettable. So usually in a modular synth, you have to plug different cables in to route the signal. In this, it's digitally stored modular matrix, and again, that allows for some really cool sound design features here. So the other notable things about it is it's got a aftertouch, a kind of polyphonic aftertouch. It doesn't have keys. It's like a circuit board that's responsive to how much pressure is placed on them. So it's very different. If that's nodding to some really boutique, like the Buchla synthesizers, which are like $4,000 for the easel. it's got a similar, I mean, it's nodding to that. So it's really interesting because Arturia has spent so many years modeling really sought after synthesizers, and their experiments into hardware, both on the analog side and in this case the hybrid side, really are so rich in feature sets when they release these products, and it's so informed by synth history and trying to give as much for as little as possible. It's really amazing how much you get in the MicroFreak. It's also got a vocoder that they added into it. That was like a kind of surprise feature that was hidden within it, and so it actually feels a lot like one of the like Destiny, like a video game where they're constantly releasing new content in firmware updates for it. So really amazing little piece. And so I thought it looked cool. I like the design. Some people don't, but I was like, this is cool. It looks cool. But in terms of just being inspired and being lost in an instrument, this is a really amazing piece. So let's take a listen, and then we'll move on to the Korg Opsix. So for the Arturia, I think genres of music that it goes well with are, I think it works well in hip hop. I think it works well in generally most electronica and soundscaping. It's a pretty versatile synth. It even has like, I don't, there's a splice and like spice feature that adds randomization into sequences and into what you're playing, and it's really a nice feature. It's just a good overall kind of sound machine, for lack of a better word. One downside to it is you do most likely need either a DAW or a kind of sampler. It's not capable of full songs in and of itself. It's something that you would add to a track with other instruments playing. It can't do everything, and I would, even for ambient style music, I think it's not sufficient to be kind of its own world. It does create incredibly rich sounds, but it's not, you can't create a whole sound universe just in itself. It's also incredibly affordable, so that's kind of it. Let's move on to the Korg Opsix. The Korg Opsix is the new, in my opinion, best form to learn FM synthesis. It's Korg's altered FM synthesis machine. And really the innovation here is taking what is usually hidden inside menu diving and making it part of the control interface in the instrument. And so this kind of oscillator mixer section, operator mixer section, is the magic of the Korg Opsix. It really allows you to get hands-on with FM synthesis. Why I love it, personally, I think FM synthesis is cool, it's great. I was never that drawn into going deep in it, but this feels like subtractive synthesis to me. And it's so hands-on that it makes FM synthesis fun to just dive into. But beyond that, the first 10 presets or so in this instrument are so easy to get lost into. There's so much movement. It's so sonically rich with the sounds they kind of demo in the unit. It really blew my mind. It's an entire song. Each of those presets is capable of an entire song or songs in and of themselves, with basic tweaks to the patch setting through the hands-on interface. It's really powerful in the amount of richness and complexity and kind of growth and evolution of sound when you're playing just a couple chords, chord progression or a couple chords. It blew my mind at how powerful of an engine this Opsix is. It really, Korg did a great job with the just overall effects that are in here, the modulation capabilities. It has a virtual matrix in it. I think it's called V Matrix for Korg's version of like a routing matrix. But the sounds, the ability to kind of create these rich, evolving, complex sounds it's just really overwhelmingly awesome for the price point that it falls into. It's about, I think it's about $800, and just surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, it has normal FM presets too that are kind of harkening back to, DX7 legacy, which are cool, and it's got some cool sequences towards the end, drum patterns and whatnot, all kind of harkening to Digitech type instruments, and those are cool. But really, again, I was impressed by the soundscaping possibilities in this instrument. So let's take a listen, and then we'll move on to the Novation Summit. So I hope that came through. I think what I think the Opsix is really good at is kind of being a all-in-one kind of get lost in a single sound type instrument. It really, unlike the MicroFreak, which really gives you complex sounds that are good additions to a song or can work if you have a couple different tracks that are all sounds out of the MicroFreak, you can do that as well with a sampler. But the Opsix to me is self-sufficient. You can create beautiful soundtrack ambient pieces just with a single patch in this instrument. And I think that's what makes it unique. You can also do really cool FM sounds and sequences and all the things that you traditionally associate with kind of FM synthesizers. But to me, the magic is the ability to create single sounds that are self-sufficient, and that's what surprised me about that instrument. So moving on to the Novation Summit, this is billed as, you know, a premium polysynth, and I think that it's not necessarily the one that you see people bragging about in their studio and on Instagram. You know, a lot of times you'll see Dave Smith instruments, or you'll see Moogs, or you see vintage instruments, and this one is a sleeper in my opinion. It is incredibly powerful. It harkens back to, you know, the mega polysynths of the early 80s, like the Jupiter 8, and but it's got digital oscillators, and I think that's why people get confused. They're like, well, why wouldn't I just find an awesome analog polysynth that you know what? And the digital oscillators really are incredibly powerful, and you also get wave tables. So there's a number of wave shapes inside of the oscillators. So it's not just oscillators with a few different wave shapes, but it's got wave tables. You can do some basic FM synthesis. It's got it's a hybrid like the MicroFreak with a multi-mode filter, and it has actually the ability to use two filters at the same time. You can split it, and so it's really a pretty powerful instrument. And again, it's not the specs on this instrument that are the impressive thing. It's just how well it works. And I think that sometimes people get confused. They're like, well, the specs aren't impressive to me. But at the end of the day, it's not so much the specs, but the end experience of the instrument and the sonic capabilities of an instrument that make it magical. And it's easy to get lost in, well, this other instrument outspecs it, or it's got this kind of good soundbite spec feature that the other one is lacking. And I think this one probably surprised me the most because it's expensive. I think it's like over $2,000, and I was like, well, that's a lot for kind of a digital oscillator polysynth. You know, it wasn't naturally like it didn't intrigue me. But the Peak was an amazing instrument, and the Summit just takes it that much further. Again, I think a misconception is that this is only kind of like a two peaks in one. Really, this works. This is just so much more powerful than a single peak. It's not double the power. It's not double the possibility. It's really its own thing, and it works so incredibly well. And a lot of the presets are rich, and it's like the Opsix in terms of getting lost in a single patch. It's like that, but on steroids. Because you can do two patches at the same time, you can layer and you can split. You get even more kind of soundtracky or ambient or even just full song capabilities in this instrument, and it's self-sufficient. And I think that's what speaks to me about it. And as I was playing it, it kind of dawned on me how amazing this synth is. And it's interesting when people come and play these, and where they come in for another product, they come in to check out a Behringer analog synth or a Roland, one of the boutiques, or they just try different products. These ones always surprise people. Over and over again, people are surprised, like, wow, I came in wanting to check this out and be amazed by this, but what is this? They ask that question, what is this? And so this is my attempt to kind of say, check these out. Don't shortchange yourself by just not giving these a chance, because they're underrated in my opinion. So let's listen to this, and then we'll kind of conclude with some final thoughts. So, a couple other things I wanted to say about the Novation before we kind of conclude. The effects section is part of its magic. The effects in this are really beautiful and amazing. And again, they surprised me. The other thing I wanted to say is that this is, it's been, people come in looking for the Jupiter X, or they come in looking for DeepMind, or they come in looking for, a Prophet 5 or a Prophet 6. And this one is, I have to say, this one gets disproportionate amount of praise. It's just, people are always and they always ask questions like sort of the oscillate, is this an all analog? You know, people are confused. They're like, why does this sound so good? And it just works. It sounds amazing, and it doesn't matter what the specs are. In my opinion, they're great specs, but this is an incredible piece, and it's a tribute to Novation for kind of taking synthesis to a whole new level. And I think, in conclusion, I think what's interesting about all three of these instruments is that they're not backwards facing. They take nods from history and the history of synthesis, but these are all really pushing synthesis to its upper limits. And that's the experience I got with each one of these. They're pushing sound design to new places and giving musicians new sounds to make music with. And I really got that experience with each of these. It reminded me of the first time I played a poly evolver, and I was like, what is this? It took me to this place sonically that I still remember. I was like, I have to have this instrument because it's nothing like I've heard before in recorded music or my own music. It just was its own thing. I had that experience with the Opsix and the Novation Summit, and the MicroFreak. It doesn't go as far, but for $299 and for how cool it looks and for just the overall broad palette it gives you access to, that blew my mind. So and that's why I've included it. I was surprised how much they packed into this little tiny freak. That is mind blowing. Again, a tribute to Arturia, who's in their hardware synths. I don't know how they make money. Again, they're just way too full featured for their price points that they come at. So that's my thoughts on these. I hope you enjoyed my confession. I really misjudged these, and if you misjudged them, don't feel bad, because I think most people do. I think they're way underrated, but I'd love to hear your thoughts below. What other ones are underrated in the market today? What other ones should we check out? What would you appreciate hearing about? Please let us know below. And if you haven't, please hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and you can find us at alamomusic.com. We'd love to talk to you there if you ever come by.